Narrative is a tricky thing. For starters, it's incredibly easy to form a narrative with little to no effort, but it's also nearly impossible to get rid of one once that narrative is created. Usually once a quote-unquote consensus opinion is decided upon by the media at large, or the population at large, that's kind of it, you're just stuck with it. And that so-called consensus shapes how we view coaches, it separates what teams we perceive as legitimate versus fraudulent, and it affects how we think of players both positively and negatively, regardless of how much we've actually watched them. That's why primetime games are so important for quarterbacks in particular and how they're perceived, because those primetime games are usually the only times when most of America gets to sit down and actually watch these guys play. Kirk Cousins will always be known as some mythical anti-clutch enigma whenever he plays at night, no matter what he does, while Josh Allen became a folk hero in a single game just because he embarrassed the Cowboys on Thanksgiving. Primetime games create narratives, whether they're fair or not. That's just unavoidable. And so today I want to set the stage and prepare you for all the narratives you're going to hear this week after Allen and the Bills take on the Steelers on Sunday night. To do that though, I want to take you through last week's loss to the Baltimore Ravens, because I think that game, as ugly as it was the perfect breeding ground for narratives. And don't get me wrong, this episode is not about making excuses for Allen or trying to polish the proverbial turd, so to speak. I'll be the first to admit that his performance against Baltimore was not his best game. But just as quickly as the pendulum swung towards the pro-Allen camp after Thanksgiving, it swung back to the anti-Allen camp after the Ravens game even harder. And to me, neither of those knee-jerk reactions were fair, and the truth of where Allen is as a quarterback is still somewhere in the middle. But, all that being said, I do want to demonstrate how box scores can be deceiving and how narratives can be built off of nothing if we're not paying attention. So, in that Ravens game, again, if you're just looking at the raw numbers, it was pretty bad. Allen's completion percentage was only 43.6, he took 6 sacks, he only passed for 146 yards, and he only rushed for 9. It was truly brutal. But buried in those brutal numbers were 10 key plays out of nearly 130 total plays in the entire game that were the difference between a bad day for Allen and a potentially massively productive day instead. Those 10 plays were all of the snaps that Buffalo faced a third or fourth down with 8 or more yards to go. Those are the money downs, as people like to call them, because being good on those desperate downs is how you make your money. Those gotta-have-it plays that get your offense out of deep holes to keep drives going and put points on the board. If you're good on those money downs, and if you don't turn the ball over a lot, generally you're gonna win most of your games no matter what else you do. And going into that Week 14 matchup against the Ravens, the Bills, as it would have it, were second in the entire league at converting on money downs. They moved the chains or scored on 32% of them, which is a great number for such a long down and distance, and that success rate was indicative of how this team won almost every week. Even if it was ugly or even if the overall numbers weren't great, when a big play needed to be made, they made it, and they almost always came out on top as a result. However, against the Ravens, when they had double-digit opportunities to make big plays in big moments to swing the result of the game, they didn't succeed on a single one. 0 out of 10. It was devastating to their offense. And to be honest, it's a credit to the Buffalo defense that they were able to still hold Baltimore down long enough to grind it out to a one-score game anyway, with the ball in Josh Allen's hands in Ravens territory in the final 2 minutes. But I digress. When people look at those third down numbers, their notions about Allen's performance might swing even further to the negative, but when we actually look at those critical plays individually, and of course objectively, we see that most of those failures were not his fault. Here's how I assigned blame to all of them myself as a totally neutral observer. 2 of those non-conversions were just from inaccurate passes from Allen, the usual stuff that we all like to criticize, of course. And the first miss was a deep corner route against an inside leverage DB from all the way across the field. And yes, he should have thrown that flat into the sideline so that Foster could adjust to it and protect the ball from the defender, but instead he floated it too deep and it really had no chance of ever being caught. And then the second miss was, I guess, sort of Allen's fault because it was technically a makeable throw, but it was also off-platform, on the run, throwing at a really weird angle, and he just barely missed it high and wide of John Brown. So honestly, it's a pretty understandable miss because that is a really hard angle to accurately deliver the ball. But at the same time, we see a lot of quarterbacks do it every single week, like Prescott and Wentz and of course Mahomes, and Allen is someone who's talented enough that we expect him to do that too, so I still gotta mark that down against him, even if it's, I guess, kind of half credit. But beyond just those 2 missed throws, you also had 3 more failed plays that were not Allen's fault because it was just screw-ups in protection against those 5 and 6 or even sometimes 7-man pressure packages that the Ravens were using all game long. And this was something that we actually saw throughout the day, not just on third down. For whatever reason, the Bills' offensive line, which is normally pretty solid in pass pro, just could not get their calls correct against all these diamond fronts from Baltimore. They were not communicating their slides well at all, and the Ravens' front 7 was able to tee off on Allen repeatedly with free rushers or with super lopsided matchups because the Bills' protection scheme got toasted over and over again. I mean, I don't know what it's going to take for NFL coaching staffs to not have rookie tight ends try to block Pro Bowl caliber pass rushers one-on-one, especially in long yardage situations, but apparently having Allen get rocked for a sack fumble by Matt Judon still wasn't enough, but again, that's probably a topic for a whole separate ranty video by itself. Beyond those sacks, you also had another 3rd and 15 down in the red zone that very easily could have been a touchdown when Allen rolled out and put a dart right on the sideline for Isaiah McKenzie, which was a fantastic throw by the way, but Marcus Peters recovered really quickly and got 2 fingers on it to just barely deflect it enough to cause an incompletion. So again, that's really more just a great defensive play and not a bad offensive play from Allen or McKenzie. You also had another sack on Allen, which I guess sort of qualifies as bad blocking along with the others, but really, in my opinion, the sack was more caused by a bad play call than anything else. For some reason, the Bills coaching staff expected Allen to hold the ball for 2.5 seconds on a 1-step drop, while Cole Beasley eventually worked himself open on a slant route from an arc release, which I say again, all of that takes forever to develop, especially when you're that high in the pocket, and I'm not really sure why Brian Daboll would call that play or just design it that way against a blitz-heavy Ravens team on 3rd and long in the first place. So I guess I don't really blame Allen for that one either. In my opinion, he was just set up to fail from the start. And then you also had their only completion in a long yardage scenario the entire game, which went for 14 yards on a shake route to Beasley that was really well run, to be honest. But obviously 14 yards when you've got to get 17 to move the chains still isn't good enough, so they had to take that field goal anyway. And then finally, the last 2 failures on 3rd down, that I should also say were not Allen's fault, those were, in my opinion, great examples of their biggest weakness on the entire roster coming back to bite them: the lack of a true number 1 size, weight, speed, ball skills kind of receiver that Allen can rely on no matter what to help him get out of a jam. Buffalo doesn't have one of those right now, other than, I guess, Duke Williams if you count him, and so Allen has to rely on a bunch of smaller receivers and a rookie tight end that has a lot of consistency problems, and that kind of inconsistent receiving core generally reflects itself in inconsistent passing stats for a quarterback, whether we realize that or not. I mean, just take a look at this 3rd and 8 from early in the 3rd quarter as an example. The Bills are in an empty formation, which was their answer to all of the Ravens' blitzes because it allowed them to spread the defense out and get a better picture of what Baltimore was doing, and Allen could see pretty clearly that the Ravens were in a cover 1 pressure look with man coverage across the board, a single safety deep, and 5 rushers up front. Ironically, this was good for Buffalo because they had a mesh call on here, which is very effective against man coverage. But before the snap, Allen sees Earl Thomas lurking over the weak side of the offensive formation. And this is important because if Earl stays in that spot instead of rotating to the deep middle like a normal free safety would do in cover 1, this play is dead in the water. The whole point of mesh is to create traffic over the middle with your X receiver that's lined up on the line of scrimmage by having him go over the top of the slot receiver, Cole Beasley, which then ideally knocks the slot corner off his line and creates a whole bunch of space for that catch and run opportunity for Beasley. But if Earl is just lurking over on that side of the field and he's not playing in the deep middle like a normal safety would do in cover 1, there's no space for Beasley to run. Thomas would just close on that immediately and either break it up or just tackle him short of the sticks on 3rd and 8. And remember, the second read on this mesh is that 10-yard square in from Dawson Knox 2, which also goes to that area of the field. So Thomas is in range to affect both of those reads from that spot if Allen doesn't somehow move him out of the way. And yes, as a side note, since I know we're all thinking it, yeah, this is a great example of why Earl Thomas is one of the best safeties ever, because he clearly knows what play is coming, and he clearly knows that their cover one is vulnerable to it, and so he's kind of abandoning his deep middle assignment and just playing the mesh because he reads it from the start. And that adds a whole different level of difficulty for Allen, because now not only does he have to execute this play, but he has to beat Earl Thomas on it while Earl already knows what they're running. And so it adds a whole different level of complexity and difficulty and makes it very, very hard to execute. But he does make it work, because after the ball is snapped, with Allen being the smart quarterback that he is, he knows that Earl is going to blow up both of those first two progressions if he doesn't do something. So he immediately rolls out to his right after seeing where Earl is, because he's trying to draw him away from the middle of the field. And again, speaking about narratives, this is part of what I'm talking about, because a lot of people will look at this play and say, why the hell is Allen leaving a perfectly good pocket? He's too jumpy, he's too nervous, he runs too early, but this rollout was calculated specifically to beat Earl Thomas on a play that Earl knew was coming. We see Pat Mahomes do it literally every game too. They run right to manipulate the safety or the linebacker or whoever it is to get them to follow, and then you throw back behind them to the left into the vacated middle area of the field, and it works almost every time. You have to be crazy talented to pull it off, obviously, but both Mahomes and Allen are crazy talented, so they both do it regularly. I mean, we've seen Allen throw touchdowns doing the exact same thing earlier this season, so again, this was totally pre-planned. Unfortunately though, despite this really great mental and physical play from Allen to beat an all-time great safety in space, Knox dropped that easy pass and Buffalo had to settle for a field goal instead of potentially getting inside the 20-yard line and getting a touchdown to cut their deficit to 4. The magnitude of that drop cannot be understated, because those kinds of great plays from Allen were the reason why Buffalo's conversion rate on money downs was so high in the first place. And to squander that kind of playmaking ability in a tough game against a great opponent, that's just something that's really hard for any quarterback to overcome. We're not done yet though, because even with all of those setbacks and mistakes the Bills offense had, they still had an opportunity very late in the game to potentially tie it up against all the odds on their final long yardage money down. 4th and 8 from the Baltimore 16, down by 7 with 1 minute and 8 seconds to go. The whole game came down to this one play, and everything before it kind of no longer mattered. It was the third Bills play in a row that the Ravens decided to send zero blitz right at Josh Allen. Both of these teams put all of their chips on the table, no safeties deep, man coverage everywhere, bringing the house with all the pressure they could muster, and this was it. Win or lose, this was it. And truth be told, the Bills actually had a pretty good play dialed up here to beat a zero blitz, which is part of the reason why this is so frustrating to look back on, knowing that they failed. Buffalo's got posts on each side with a whip out from Beasley as well, just as their oh shit button if all else fails, and post routes in particular are really good against blitz zero because there's no safety in the middle of the field. It's literally one-on-one, receiver versus corner on an island, and if that receiver wins on the route, they pretty much score automatically. It's a winner-take-all kind of throw here, and Allen knows it. He wants the post all the way from the second he sees this zero-look pre-snap, as he should, but in order for it to work, he still needs Brown to win that battle against Marcus Peters in the first place. That's the important part of the play here, not the quarterback. And that's also the thing that pisses me off so much, because not only did Brown not win that battle, but he lost it by running a really horseshit route. There's two good ways to run a route against press man and win. Either you release outside like you're running a go route, you get them to flip their hips and stack on top of you to stop that go so that you can then cut underneath them or through them to get to the post, and you see dig routes and deep outs run this way all the time too by DeAndre Hopkins and AJ Green. It's a really effective technique for physical receivers. Or you release inside, use some physicality to bend back into them, and then once you widen that corner out, you snap the route off flat and inside to the post. That's called the shoulder ride technique, by the way, and to this day I still think Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Irvin, and Steve Smith are all the best to ever do it, and that one technique is a big reason why they're all going to be Hall of Famers, because it f***ing works, but that's besides the point. Now, what Brown does on this route instead of either of those long proven techniques is release inside, stutter his feet a little bit about 3 yards past the line of scrimmage while Peters is still on top of him, And then he runs the skinniest, most rounded post route you've ever seen that does absolutely nothing to flatten down and separate away from Peters' leverage. He didn't use any sort of physicality to press him wide and then snap inside. He never even stemmed outside to try to get him to flip his hips early. He just gave that little stutter and that was it. I mean, this throw realistically had no shot. Yes, it was a great play by Peters, a game-saving play even, but John Brown, you gotta help your quarterback out. You gotta run a route he can actually work with. This was a good decision and a good throw by Allen. It was the only real decision he could make given the circumstances, but because of a poorly run route by his best wide receiver in a critical moment, nobody's talking about the narrative that Allen made a good decision and a good throw in a do-or-die situation. They're talking about the 43% completion percentage, the abysmal third down conversion rate, the 6 sacks, and the terrible yardage totals. It doesn't matter that literally only 2 of those failed third downs were even his fault. It doesn't matter that his receivers dropped no fewer than 3 good passes for a lot of yards. And it doesn't matter that since September, Allen has scored 19 total touchdowns and only thrown 2 picks. None of that counts when a narrative is formed, and that's really the root of the problem. Look, I get it, Allen's not perfect. The deep ball accuracy is still a real concern. He plays hero ball sometimes and gets himself into trouble by running into pressure. There's still a lot of development to be done here, and he's not a finished product. But please, I beg of you, as you're watching this young quarterback take on maybe the best defense in football, on the road, in primetime this Sunday, resist the urge to create a narrative. Resist the urge to give up on him if things don't go well, and also resist the urge to overly praise him if things do go well. Football is a complicated machine with 22 moving parts on 120 plays a game. There's a lot going on, and even someone like me who's dedicated himself to studying that machine still doesn't know dick compared to literally every coach, player, and GM in the league. Knee-jerk narratives are dangerous because they lazily try to simplify that which cannot be easily simplified, and it leads to a lot of misinformation and a lot of unfair judgment of players that truthfully don't deserve it. Hell, it's my job to try to do just that every single week, and even I still suck at it because football is just that hard to predict. I'm not trying to rain on the sports media parade, and I'm not trying to say don't have opinions. Opinions are great, especially when it comes to talking about sports. I'm just saying that no matter what your opinion is, and no matter what the narrative is, always keep an open mind. Always be willing to recognize improvement when you see it, and be willing to recognize regression when you see it too. Because at its core, admitting to yourself, and I mean really being honest about the truth that none of us know what the f*** is gonna happen every week, that, my friends, is the only narrative that matters. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and of course thank you again to our longtime channel partner, Manscaped, for sponsoring today's show as well. We are deadass in the middle of the holiday shopping season, which means you're probably still hunting for either really good deals after Black Friday or some nice stocking stuffers to round out your list. And to help you finish that list, Manscaped are back once again with that big 20% promo code discount for all Film Room viewers. If you go check out Manscaped at the link below, they've got everything you can think of for male grooming. There's a really powerful ceramic, waterproof, no-nick trimmer. There's safety razors that give you a closer and cheaper shave than disposables. There's deodorants and colognes and body washes and moisturizers. I mean, literally anything you can think of for a guy to take care of himself, they've got it. You can get any of those items individually, or you can get them together at an even higher discount in what's called the Perfect Package 2.0. You can get replenishment plans that automatically restock you on things you run out of frequently, and I use those myself for their body wash because, as I've mentioned many times before, it's literally my favorite smell on planet Earth. There's just a lot to pick from in a really wide spectrum of products, and I can't recommend any of them enough. So if you're interested in checking any of that out for yourself, again, click that link in the description below. And if you decide you want to buy anything either for you or as a gift, use that promo code BrettK20 for 20% off your entire order, plus free shipping, plus 2 free gifts from Manscaped on the house. Again, thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring the show. And as for me and channel news, I'm happy to finally be done with these last 2 back-to-back episodes because I feel like I can sleep again. I am really exhausted, if I'm being honest, so I'm going to be sleeping probably now until kickoff tomorrow. I will, of course, be back next week, all refreshed and revitalized, for another Film Room episode, probably a pretty long one if I end up doing that Ryan Tannehill redemption saga thing I've been thinking about doing for a while now. Maybe I'll finally hit on the disaster that is the Dallas Cowboys. I haven't quite decided yet, so I guess we'll find out. But yeah, tune in next week for whatever the all-new episode is that I've got. I think you're going to like it either way. And yeah, until then, later.